I want to talk about my own experience with depression. And I want to be mindful of the fact that during the world going into lockdown and a lot of uncertainty occurring, even though nothing was ever really certain, that there's been an increase in suicide. And I know that there's a beautiful element to understanding something so that we can feel like quite relief. It's like, oh, I understand that, I get it now. Oh, I feel better. There's also danger in needing to know and understand and pull something apart in order to feel kind of safer in control, because, you know, there's a little bit of outsourcing going on there of needing to understand, because then we can feel like we can control it and fix it in order to feel safe. And that's not really healthy. So I know I'm kind of dancing on the edge of breaking something down that I think actually needs to be not so much understood so we can fix it, but bring a different perspective to it so that it doesn't take us to that place of feeling deeply helpless. Now, the topic of depression, I guess if you've experienced it or you're feeling it right now, if you've ever felt it, it can feel much safer. And we kind of want to hear, this is why we're depressed, this is what's going on, and here's the answer and here's the solution. But actually, I'm going to suggest a completely different perspective based on my own personal experience with depression, for which I go through a few times every single year. And that's actually a suggestion, and it's something that I just explore in my own mind and heart, that it's somewhat a rite of passage. So I'm going to break this down by using the way that ancient civilizations mature, right? If you think about the stories of the greatest gurus and philosophers and spiritual teachers, or beautiful leaders of our planet who have lived from a place of deep integrity and integrated wholesomeness within themselves, they've gone through these like rites of passage, whether quite literally or metaphorically because of the circumstance. An example of that is Nelson Mandela. Like, went to jail for 26 or 27 years for a crime he didn't commit. And he popped out the other side, and his very famous words, in summary, I don't want to butcher it, but he said, I knew that I had to like leave my hate and blame and anger and resentment behind. Otherwise, if I left, I'd still be in jail. And, you know, that time in prison is a rite of passage of such. And if you think about ancient civilizations, I know in the land that I live in, the indigenous Aboriginal tribes here, they have a rite of passage for their men, right? They have what's called a walkabout, and they go from being a boy into a man, and they do this walkabout, quite literally a walkabout in the outback. And there's traditions and ceremonies for women going from a girl to a woman, you know, when they're come into their menstruating cycles. There's these rites of passage. There's this passage they must go through, and in a way, these passages are like aspects of darkness. They are they're difficult. You meet parts of doubt and fear that you've never had to look at before, perhaps. And in my experience of my own personal depression, it's always been, whether unconsciously or consciously, I've known it at the time, and often I haven't. It's only when I go through it now that I'm like, I know what this is. This is that void. This is the desert. That, you know, metaphorically, quite literally actually, that Jesus, like the stories of Jesus, walked through the desert. And Gandhi, you know, going his walks and his fasts and his silences, like these passages that we either through ceremony have been done for eons to work with the evolution of ourselves on a mental, emotional, physical, spiritual level. I believe that our soul or a different part of ourselves knows that this needs to be done. And if this isn't practiced in tradition because of like conditioning and colonization, such as, you know, in my world where I grew up in, there's no such thing as a rite of passage. We go through it within ourselves as a form of depression, because in my experience, those people that I've worked with, and I have worked with different severities of depression with at least more than 100 people experiencing it. At least it's more likely up around 1,000, that I've spoken to or worked with, but I know like very intimately worked with different severities of depression, including being on suicide, right? Or addicted to hard drugs, like fucking hard shit. That where they have been, like this depression is almost a darkness that they're moving, that or that's arisen almost in them, because sometimes it can be like you can wake up and you feel it, and I've had that. It's a process, and I'm going to be careful here not to use like cliche terms. It's a process of a part of you dying. And at the root, if I'm to look at all of the different people and all of the different experiences that I've supported them through, and different levels and varieties and severities of depression and helplessness, it's always been either a healing or a suffering of a part of us that no longer serves us, that was outsourcing our sense of power and or joy. I don't want to give too much context or go too deeply into that. If that hit you and at some level part of you got that, then I hope that what you're hearing is that if you are experiencing depression, perhaps it might be powerful to get a little bit more curious about what you're experiencing as more than chemical imbalance. Because do I believe that depression is created by a chemical imbalance or imbalances in ourselves? Yeah, 100%. I do believe that chemical imbalance changes the way we feel and experience life, and that it may have been a codependence on outsourcing so many different, like our power, our sense of wholesomeness, or our sense of happiness outside of ourselves from so many different vices or validation or perhaps stories. But at the root of it, sorry, I'm coming back on track here. At the root of it, what I really feel is that that darkness or that depressive time is old trauma that no longer serves us, old belief systems that have been holding us down, old patterns where we depress what we feel coming up and out, trying to move through. And what we kind of see, because it's already within us, what we see and feel is like this big, heavy cloud of darkness. And a way that I support myself through that, because I do not want to diagnose here and I do not want to say that this is the way to go, but the way in which I have supported myself has been absolute and it's endless amounts of grounding, like quite physically putting my feet on the ground, feeling my body and getting back into my body and trusting that this time in the desert, this passage in the void, that this experience is a healing from a different part of myself that is trying to let go of an old dependency, of an old habit of outsourcing, of an outdated belief system where I was determining like my happiness or my worth or my success or my well-being or my identity out on something external. It's like, I can only be happy then, or I'm only successful then, or this should have been this way, or this person should have done that. Like these loops of ideas that kind of trap us in. It's like something in me knows that has to die, and sometimes it has to come up. So I truly just trust that. And this is where we have to trust life and practice surrender, not here like I'm surrendering, I'm accepting, like in our being. Because when we don't and we fight it, we become a martyr to our own process, right? We become a victim to something that I believe is a evolutionary stage. It's like everything in life goes through this figure of eight of gestation, birth, maturity, and death. And we just have to keep going through this cycle. And that death bit can sometimes come with a feeling of deep depression where it feels like the joy is sucked out of us, because it's like life itself or our higher self is saying, stop outsourcing this and this and this. Let go of this old like identity or belief system or decision that you've made about yourself or life that it has to be a certain way, and come back home to yourself and return here and surrender to what's right here and now. And you will find that you might feel in pain, you might be sad, you might feel exhausted, you might feel depressed, but you're not suffering in it. Because if you're fighting it, you feed it and you drop into helplessness. And helplessness is where it can get very, very dangerous because we feel that there is no way out. But the truth is, and I really want you to hear me here, the only thing that is certain and permanent in life is that everything passes, that everything changes. That is the nature of life itself. When we hold and we suffer in times of darkness, we extend that period. We extend the hold. We extend the rite of passage, because the lesson in it is a deep, deep surrender and acceptance of what is, and letting go, and just perhaps seeing what happens when you get out of your own way, when you get out of your own head. I'm not by any means saying that this is the be all and all solution. This is my experience of it, and I wanted to offer it because I know, and we all know, we can see that depression is on the rise, and I think that there are so many individual and collective rites of passages happening right now, and I thought if I can help someone perhaps feel safe in that and trust that and honor and perhaps even respect that process that they're going through, you won't suffer in it, you won't become the victim of it, and you won't drop down into helplessness. If you do feel any of that, I am going to attach helplines to lines where you can call to get someone's support if you're feeling that way. I just want to remind you, this will pass. Don't be afraid of what you're feeling. Don't be afraid of the darkness. Sometimes it's all you need to do in order to go through this time, and trust this, and you will pop out the other side, even if it feels like you're going to be there forever.